Welcome back. Well, it's been yet another busy news week in South Africa with the Constitutional Court being a focal point. Of course, we've seen Acting Deputy Chief Justice Mbuyiseli Madlanga delivering his final judgment as he hung up his robe. And then, of course, we saw the MK Party and its leader, Jacob Zuma, attempting to reverse President Cyril Ramaphosa's decision to place Police Minister Senzo Mchunu on special leave. That and so many other stories. We'll look at those that stand out for you. We also saw the swearing in, for instance, of the acting Police Minister Firoz Cachalia. But which stories stood out for you, and what do you want to see that happen with them as they continue to unfold? Send us a WhatsApp on 072 110 5584 or give us a call on 010 594 6010. We'll reflect on those stories with political analyst Asanda Ngoasheng joining us via video link, and also a brand reputation expert, Mr. Tshepo Matseba. Guys, a good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we'll get into some of the court stories that we saw this week, because it certainly was a busy week, particularly in the Court. But I do want to go first to what we've been covering now with our viewers. The SACP at its 104th birthday celebrations, a very outspoken Solima Baila there, Asanda, speaking about how the ANC has gotten arrogant with power. We're going to forge ahead with going at the elections in 2026 on our own as the SACP. That's, of course, what they're saying. And also saying, going as far as saying that, government departments that have been allocated to the SACP mean nothing because the party ministers still run those departments under ANC control. It's interesting that you'd see Mapaila, I suppose, doubling down on these views. The question becomes, though, could they do well in 2026? And what do you make of the temperature of that address by the General Secretary of the SACP, Asanda?
Well, I think that, this has been a long time coming, in the sense that this is not the first time that the SACP has been complaining about the ANC and the ways in which it conducts itself as an alliance partner. You'll remember that just before the elections, they were complaining that the ANC met the DAs as far as before the elections of May, and they were unhappy with this because they were excluded from that meeting. And of course, we saw after the actual election that the DA and the ANC, together with other political parties, then formed the GNU, which effectively put, it kind of highlighted or I suppose exposed what they had been saying as the SACP. I think also that they've been arguing that, the ANC has betrayed the National Democratic Revolution and the promises that were made post-1994 or pre-1994, even in the agreements that were made with all the different alliance partners. And you would have seen that even COSATU joined in this cause to kind of separate themselves from the ANC and no longer trust the ANC. In fact, even this argument or the conversation or conflict between the US and South Africa also plays a role, in the sense that the SACP is one of those political organizations that have consistently said the ANC is pursuing a neoliberal agenda and it's going to get us into trouble at some point. And in fact, there was a lot of distrust and mistrust within the SACP and other alliance partners about how chummy the relationship between the US and South Africa was at some point. And so all of these issues, which are long-standing, are now coming to a head. And of course, you have a political organization that is the SACP. It's not just, a political organization. It's an ideological stance that is predetermined and pre-existing. And when in the ways in which the ANC acts and behaves now is very far from a communist state. It's very far from the ideologies of communism or even Marxism, if you want to expand it in terms of the ideologies that inform the SACP and some of the alliance partners.
Yeah. question, of course, and perhaps we'll tackle this later, is if there is, that ideological stance of the SACP, if it is one that really can be grasped by the South African electorate. So let's look at some of the messaging that Solly Mapaila is using. He says, and I quote, "The time for working class representation in the state has come. The reason people are poor is because their land was taken away and no one is bringing their land back into their hands." Tshepo, do you want to take a stab at this one? The kind of messaging that he's using ahead of 2026, could it stand the SACP in good stead for the electorate?
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to engage. I think it's the position that the SACP is taking has been consistent. The language is a bit becoming stronger, but this type of tone and optics we've heard before, we've seen before, and you would expect of them to say the type of things that they're saying. In terms of the electorate, what you expect is that what you say is something that you do. So there's a history that they make a promise that they will contest elections, and then elections arrive, they do the opposite and continue with their alliance and support for the African National Congress. It's very difficult also if you keep talking about independence when you have some key people who participate in the state when they're in your own organization, such as the SACP. So that creates a unique conflict in their context. They may not be the president of the country, but they are still really, truly, as part of the alliance, they are part of a system. And at some point, if you want the electorate, people to believe you, we know that we often repeat these words, that a brand is a promise that is fulfilled. And so if you want the electorate and people to believe you, you have to do what you say and what you promise in conversations. And they have not been really consistent in delivering on that promise of independence. The tone and the language might be right in terms of creating a dialogue and a discussion, a bit of controversy, getting us to test the value of this alliance, but also to test the promises that were made of 1994, perhaps towards a transformation and total transformation of these people, and maybe even the promises that were made in the Freedom Charter. That may be interesting, a debate to have. So they do have a role to play. But if you want to make real impact in attracting voters, you might want to start doing exactly what you promise.
Yeah, I think the real question also becomes in 2026, if the SACP does go at it alone, as they insist that they're going to do, Asanda, could this hurt the African National Congress?
I mean, I think it definitely can. You must remember that the ANC is literally on its, on its knees at this point, because they, at 40% as a political party, having lost much of the support they got in KZN and much of the support that they had in Gauteng. So they can't afford to lose any more. And in fact, they should be fighting to claim back or to claw back some of the support that they previously had. But I think, one of the most difficult things about this alliance has always been the fact that you cannot have capital and political elites, within the same room with labor and with those who espouse communist and socialist principles. It has never happened or worked anywhere. If you look at even in the UK, there's a political party that's the Labour Party, and this always comes to a head. This idea that it's not possible to both be government and have to work with capital and become political elites while also fighting for the ordinary man. Of course, it's a political ideal and one that is what they were going for when they built the alliance in the first place. But what we're seeing with this GNU is that the ANC is moving from being more of a center political party that is a broad church that accommodates the SACPs of this world, and the various other alliance partners that espouse communism, socialism, and other, ideologies outside of capital markets and social market theories. And so we're seeing that there's a move away from that, and there's a move towards, the more neoliberal structures of economy and the more neoliberal arguments around policymaking and around how this country is governed, around how this economy is thought off. If you think of just a very simple and a basic thing, if we were truly to be a country that was governed by people who espoused communist or even socialist ideals, something like, for instance, the grants that people get, people would be driven towards a government-owned kind of food bank where they could buy food by the tonnage, because that's much cheaper than going to a Pick and Pay or a Checkers or a ShopRite or any of the kind of existing retailers that people end up using their 350 to buy food from. And so it's been 30 years of actually being very far from including those ideals, and really unfortunately, a lot of, some talking and not walking in the direction that this country needs to go in order for the majority of this country to actually be included in the economy. Because you must remember that one of the main reasons why apartheid ended is because business came together with ANC and other political structures to basically ask that, we call it a truce because they didn't have customers. And we are now firmly back at a place where the majority of Black people are not able to afford anything unless they're paying for it by grant, which kind of defeats the purpose. If you look at it from a pure capitalistic perspective, it defeats the very purpose of why the Afrikaner elites, who were businessmen, came to the ANC in the first place. Never mind, the ideal of wanting democracy, the ideal of wanting political liberation. And so we do need to keep having these conversations, and there's going to come a time when the SACP is really going to have to no longer just talk about moving, but actually physically move themselves. And when they do, they are going to get a big chunk of the ANC votes, in the same way that the EFF has got a big chunk of the ANC votes. The MKP has gotten a big chunk of the votes. These are all ANC babies and ANC product, effectively. And so it would be, the same, and it would take a chunk, because now if you take the ANC 40%, you add the MKP, you add the EFF, you essentially have an ANC majority. But because those political structures are no longer within the ANC, we don't count it like that. But those are ideological expressions of people and ideologies that used to sit within the ANC that no longer sit within the ANC.
Yeah, one wonders what the ANC now says. We did see, for instance, Mahlengi Bengu Mutsiri saying that they will be discussing their approach to that decision by the SACP. We've known about it since 2022. How has the ANC engaged with the SACP? We'll get into that with Tshepo, for instance. What kind of dialogue needs to take place between the SACP and the ANC as we get closer and closer to 2026. But we're taking your calls as well, stories that stood out for you, perhaps your take on where we are right now, SACP and ANC relations. 0105946010 is the number. Mulantwa is calling in from Kempton Park. Mulantwa, good evening. Thanks for calling.
No, thanks. Good evening, my lady. How are you?
I'm well, Dada. Thank you so much for calling. Talk to us.
I just want to touch on two issues. The first one is the one of the South African Communist Party.
Yeah.
I think the fact of the matter is that the Communist Party are frustrated with the attitude of the African National Congress, in the sense that you cannot continue to have whereby these comrades, they are deployed in this government, but what you see at the end of the day, these comrades are accumulating wealth, assets in everything, but the majority of the poor, they remain in the same solution, the same status. So it cannot be correct like that. Actually, I can categorize that now. The black political parties in South Africa, they become a pyramid scheme. It's not about the people. It's a scheme just to use people, majority of the poor popular vote, and get into position. But after that, it's about themselves, using the state resources for their families and their friends and etc. The second one is that I'm baffled by the premium housing that there are these HOTs that they found that they're underperforming. But instead of firing them, is allocating them to another responsibilities. For me, it's totally illogic. It doesn't make sense. How do you take a person who's underperforming and give that person another responsibility than firing that person? Because this thing of the premium of allocating people that have been underperforming is opening for illegal litigation. It can't make sense. This is the public service. It's not about people political ambitions.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Mulandwa, a strong point. Thank you so much for calling. Mulandwa calling in there from Kempton Park. We'll take a look at a couple WhatsApps as well as we continue with Tshepo, Matseba as well as Asanda and Ngoasheng on the other side of this short break. Do stay with us. Okay, then I'm just going to do... Welcome back. You're still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition. We continue, as we do every other Sunday, to look back on the week that was. What is it that stood out for you in the past 7 days of South Africa? Let's take a look at a couple of WhatsApps that have come in from our viewers. Anonymous says, what stood out for me is nothing more than the Deputy President Mashadila's blatant attempt to undermine the nation in front of cameras about a diamond and properties. Anonymous, thanks for that WhatsApp. Vela says, good evening, Naledi. SACP contesting 2026. I foresee a disaster. This is going to cripple the ANC, Vela says. Thank you so much for sending in that text. Sam says, good evening, Naledi. Leading stories. MK party challenging a decision by Cyril Ramaphosa on Senzo Mchunu. SACP saying ANC having been arrogant towards them, and 5 people killed in KZN accidents. Trump with 30% tariffs increase. Yeah, lots to talk about, Sam. We'll try and get through as many of those as possible as well. Madlanga, he says, I fully concur with the SACP that the ANC has dismally failed to implement a number of resolutions taken in all conferences. Mandla, thank you so much for sending in your text. Okay, we'll continue to look at it now with Asanda Ngoasheng, our political analyst and brand reputation expert, Mr. Tshepo Matseba. Tshepo, let's talk about communication and what we need to be saying. I think there was the point made earlier about what is it that the ANC needs to be saying to smooth over relations with the SACP. I'd like you to start there. But I do also want to, if you'll let me just stack questions for you, just in the interest of time. The 7th of August is fast approaching, and we're getting closer and closer to this U.S. tariff of 30% for South Africa. I mean, you've got the agricultural industry that has raised all sorts of concerns, and then there's some sort of, discussion around, well, we are also looking at other markets where we can expand ourselves. But I wonder if there is a sense that South Africa just simply cannot say the right thing to turn this around, in your view.
Yeah, so I'll start with the first stack
Sure.
with regards to the SACP and how they need to engage with the ANC. I think, politically speaking, the level of tone that they are using, I think it works for political narrative. But you are hoping that behind the scenes, that there's a high level constructive engagement that speaks openly about the truth and the facts around the alliance, and especially importantly that there shouldn't be a migration from the promises that were made in terms of transformation and transforming people and creating more, I guess, access for Black people and the previously disadvantaged, the Africans, to participate fully in the economy and have access to the gains of the economy. So you expect the most senior people in the ANC and in the SACP to start talking, and importantly, for them to think about talks about dialogue, because going at, if the SACP continues, really, of course, the indication is that really this would harm the ANC's image, its reputation, but it will also harm the ANC's prospects of staying as sort of what you may call the leading party or the majority party in the context of this government of national unity. It would create serious problems for the ANC in the same way that you would have expected the ANC to be in a position to consider constructive conversations with the MK party and with the EFF to try and form a coalition so that Africans and Black people in majority may feel that there's prospects of collaboration and of the implementation of policies that are pro transformation, so that the majority may gain an accelerated access to land ownership and accelerated access to jobs and economic opportunities. With regards to, if we reflect on the US, I mean, locally and internationally, the headlines are creating problems for us as a country, and importantly, sectors such as the wine industry in South Africa, the automotive sector in South Africa. I think that the country has done its best, I guess, to try through President Cyril Ramaphosa and the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, Minister Park Stau, to articulate a proposition that reinforces that there are talks that are taking place behind the scenes. But effectively what this does is that it knocks down many important aspects about South Africa's second largest trading partner, our relationship with the US. It also creates problems not only for the motoring sector, but if you think about AGOA as an opportunity, this effectively means that AGOA is probably a factor of no more, even though it's still up for review as a policy. And so South Africa has a dual problem: to appease investors and say that we are still a viable market amid this reputationally and economically harmful levels of tariffs. We know that we are not the only ones impacted on the continent, others less than we are, but many countries are going through this challenge.
Yeah.
The countries that are going to survive the storm are the ones that are able to communicate effectively and demonstrate that the conversations, yes, are taking place behind the scenes, but that there are technical and practical measures that they are taking to effectively manage the storm.
Yeah.
And we seem to be doing okay in that direction if you think about it from a messaging perspective.
Yeah. Asanda, perhaps you want to knock down just a couple more of the big stories of the week. The MK party heading to the Constitutional Court to challenge Police Minister Senzo Mchunu being placed on special leave. Was that a play of politics, or was there real strategy there in your view?
Well, I mean, I think there is definitely real strategy. You must remember that, much as we like them or don't like them, the MK is an opposition political party, and it has to play that role of being in opposition and of challenging the ANC's very actions. I mean, it's always quite interesting when you think about Jacob Zuma's own actions and you hear what he says now as the MK leader. But, they are the opposition, and it is their prerogative to challenge these things. How they're challenging it, the validity of the arguments is always, another question. But I think also at the same time that, it is important to note that these kinds of conversations, to my mind, that took place in court are actually the kinds of conversations that should have been taking place in the legislature, because that is the place where you are supposed to be debating and arguing about executive powers and whether the president has overstepped them. And it's only when you fail at the level of the legislature that you then can take these issues to court. So if you think about separation of powers, it starts with the legislature. That's the place where you hold the president accountable. And then if you cannot do it there, then you go to the judicial arm. But one of the things that has happened with the GNU is that a lot of the debates that effectively would take place in public, in a transparent form, in Parliament, are now taking place behind closed doors between GNU members, which means that those outside of the GNU are struggling at this point to be able to engage, to be able to challenge in the ways that were previously easy, in the ways that were previously acceptable. And so part of what's happening is that we are rethinking how we engage and how we shift and move, considering that in some ways the GNU has actually privatized the legislative arm and the debates and the challenges that are supposed to take place there, and have actually put them behind closed doors, and the level of transparency that we used to have doesn't unfortunately exist anymore. And that's something that we need to be able to discuss, to engage, and to decide as South Africans, and to rethink our frameworks, and even challenge the constitution and constitutionality of not having those debates in a transparent and public manner, because we, the people of South Africa, voted these people in, and we need to know what decisions are being made and for what before they are finalized. As we would when the ANC was the majority, they still had to debate those issues, even if it was a rubber stamping situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be quite the month that comes, because also as you talk about some of those issues, we are also going to be seeing Professor Firoz Cachalia hitting the ground running in the Department of Police. That's going to be something. And I wonder what and I'm going to stay with you, Asanda, on this one, actually, because I'm keen to hear your views on the kind of stance, messaging, strength that Professor Cachalia needs to show at a time like this. I mean, if you had his ear, what would you say?
Well, I mean, I think, the first thing he needs to do is to reassert and to kind of give South Africans confidence in the police and all state security apparatus, because at this point, their brand reputation, the trust deficit is high with South Africans. And we need to hear from him what he's planned to clean up the police and to ensure that, political elites are not opening the door to criminality and actually abdicating their very duty. I mean, we vote them in as South Africans to lead us first, and most importantly, to safeguard South Africa and to not, open the door for abuse of power. And this is exactly what they're being accused of doing. When the police minister is one of the accused of, literally opening the door to drug deals, opening the door to political killings and all kinds of other nefarious activities, it really does not make one sleep well at night, because you don't know at the level of ordinary South African if the person that's going to try and break into your house, try to rape your child, or try to murder you is going to be you're going to get any kind of justice, because when those at the top are corrupt and allow these acts to take place, it means that, even an ordinary criminal is easily going to get away with crime. And this is the problem with South Africa and the problem with the African National Congress and its corruption. It's not so much the corruption itself and the money that gets stolen. It's the fact that you actually build a culture of corruption and you build a culture of lack of care, such as we're seeing this, in the ways in which democratic structures in villages, like there's a case right now in Ngoasheng village where there was a disaster management project where, it sounds like local politicians are running amok and doing as they will and not caring about the will and the desires of the people. And this is not the first time. Every municipal election, ANC members say we chose this person to be the one that stands for councillor, but the ANC has chosen its own person. And this is an abdication of democracy, because effectively what you're doing is you're saying that, people don't have a right to choose the people who are going to represent them and lead, which defeats the entire purpose of democratic elections, particularly at a municipal level where the person that you elect is really the guy who's going to wake up at night when you don't have water.
Yeah, I do want to let you go, but I'm out of time, and I'll give you 30 seconds for this, Tshepo, just quickly. Concord, Magade, gosh, it's been 20 years for Nkosana Magade, and the Concord sending his issue all the way back to the SCA again. I mean, lessons on what we learn on the 2 decades of watching Magade battle Vodacom.
Yeah, it's a very difficult story to observe because one can only have empathy for Makate and the journey that he's going through. And I guess Vodacom is building a case and they use the legal instruments. But what it does, perception-wise, in terms of the public, it may create an impression that the corporate is arrogant, that the corporate is coming across like a bully against a very, very young, energetic young man who is going through a lot of financial and emotional and physical effort over such a period of time. And one would expect that behind the scenes, again, sanity would prevail, that we are willing to have a conversation, but also willing to have a real, practical and tangible recommendation that is admissible by the other party, so that this impasse can come to an end without having to go through these court details. When you continue with legal battles in this fashion, it gives an impression that there's a lot of money that you may have made, and in any process you are not willing as a corporate to actually back down or to collaborate and just end the impasse that is actually reputationally harming everybody than anything else.
But one thing's for sure is that South Africa is certainly watching this battle between Nkosana Magade and Vodacom very closely, with so much